Good morning. My Cree name is Sokia Skiaspoyo, which means strong earth woman. My French name is Jeannine Carrière, and most English people call me Jeannine Carrière. I have been a visitor on Coast Salish territory for 5 years, and I teach in the School of Social Work, Indigenous specialization. I live in Cobble Hill, Up Island, in the territory of the Cowichan peoples. This morning I'd like to speak a little bit about cultural planning, adoption, and Aboriginal children. I have been working on the topic of adoption for a long time. It has personal and professional meaning for me as an adoptee and an adoptive parent. The issue is close to my heart. So when I arrived at UVic several years ago, 5 years ago, the Ministry of Children and Family Development approached me and asked me to look at the issue of cultural planning and Aboriginal children. In British Columbia, there has been a policy on cultural planning since 1996, and it is a policy that requires the adoption worker to work with the adoptive family, I should say, to develop a cultural plan that is acceptable to the child's birth family and Indigenous community, and is presented to the Exceptions Committee. The Exceptions Committee is a ministry committee that is in place to approve adoptions of Indigenous children into non-Indigenous families. So the cultural plan itself is only filled out when it is a non-Indigenous adoptive family adopting an Indigenous child. So this policy had, the impact or the outcomes of this policy had not been examined. And so the ministry approached me and asked me if I'd be interested in doing this work. And of course I was. And basically what I did was divided the study into 3 parts. First, phase 1 is now complete, and that was a series of interviews with non-Indigenous adoptive families who have adopted Indigenous children, as well as some Indigenous community practitioners who have had experience with cultural planning. Phase 2 is currently underway, and that is we've developed a qualitative online survey with adoption, roots, and guardianship workers in British Columbia, and that data is just in, so we're just in the process of writing the report. And phase 3 will begin shortly, and that is a series of interviews in a storytelling methodology that will interview Indigenous youth who have been adopted in non-Indigenous families for their views and thoughts on cultural planning. So I'll talk a little bit about the outcomes of phase 1 because that's the study that's been complete. It was a bit of a surprise because one would assume with the provincial policy that there would be some consistency in how the policy is being utilized, but the first striking event that we saw was that there was no consistency. It depended on the region, it depended on the worker, it depended on the family. And so the cultural plan was being administered differently in different areas by different people, which is was disturbing because we want Indigenous children to receive the same quality of cultural planning wherever they live and whoever they live with. And of course the commitment to the cultural planning process should be consistent for all workers and for adoptive families. So that was one of the major findings. The other one was that people were unfamiliar with how to compose the plan. So perhaps it was the adoptive family who didn't really know about the child's cultural background and how to maintain that, or it was a lack of knowing about the child's birth family, there was no dialogue with the birth family, or in some cases it was a paper exercise where, because the family needed to do this to adopt the child, they filled out the ticky boxes without some obvious sort of understanding or commitment to how an integrated cultural plan would work. There was also some issues around using the cultural plan, having processes within the cultural plan identified that were not appropriate for the Indigenous children in their home. For example, they might have a Coast Salish child in their home, but we're taking them to other kinds of community events or ceremonies. I found one of the families in particular who had a Métis child. They just had no idea where to go to get information and what kind of events, what kind of linkages and connections to the community that they should be making. There was a family who had an Inuit baby, and I have to give them a lot of credit for trying so hard, but they're living in Vancouver, where it's rather difficult to make connections with an Inuit community. So they had used a lot of their resources to travel to the north where this child's family resides, birth family, and had made a lot of efforts, and I was so happy that I was able to connect them. This is serendipitous. I happened to meet a child and youth mental health worker in Vancouver who is Inuit, so I was able to connect him with them, and it was such a relief for them, because here's a family that was committed to cultural planning, but they just didn't know and didn't have the local resources to connect to. So there are a lot of other issues, a lot of other findings, such as the lack of education around what is culture and what is cultural planning for both workers and families, and lack of resources so that adoptive families can maintain those connections. For example, some of the adoptive families, very often adoptive families are also foster parents, and so they have a lot of children to consider when they're making travel plans to keep children connected, for example. So the ministry doesn't provide extra travel or food or any kind of resources to do that. So there's a lot involved in cultural planning. It's not a paper exercise. It's a very important piece of work to maintain an Indigenous child's identity. So I am happy that we're doing this work. I am very grateful to some of the graduate students who are involved with this work, and we're looking forward to completing phase 2 and phase 3. Thank you.